Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of Future Secured. Now, we're lucky to be joined by Karim Toubba, who's the CEO of LastPass, and they are a global leader in password identity management used by over 100,000 businesses. Now, LastPass has been helping Australian organisations as well improve their access to security for several years, and they've got a growing local footprint, and Karim's out touring Australia at the moment, so we're lucky to grab him. Now, Karim has over 25 years in cybersecurity leadership, including roles at Cisco and Juniper networks, as well as CEO of Kenna Security. And today he's going to share with us what it takes to build products that are both secure and scalable. We're also going to explore Karim's personal journey into cybersecurity, why password managers still face adoption hurdles, and how LastPass is tackling emerging risks like shadow IT and shadow AI with new tools. So thank you so much for joining us, Karim. Thank you, as always, for joining me, my co-host, Jason. And over to you, Jason, for the first question.
Thanks, Tommy. And I'll declare put the hand up early. As the team know in Australia, I've been a long time LastPass customer. So that's going back many years. I think it's since maybe 2018 or something like that. And paid customer too. So this is not a paid promotion. But if you guys want to help me out anytime, that's fine. I've always said that to Matt and the team here. Mate, there's so much to cover in this one, and I think just for our listeners, just as a little starter, just find out a bit more. Tom did a really good intro there as usual, just sort of giving a background on yourself. But you sort of mentioned there, how did you get into cybersecurity? Because most of us tend to be accidental heroes. We started doing something else and then sort of fell across into cyber, just from a divergent path, maybe through a business we were with or something. But can you just give us your story, mate, on how you basically got to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, good to join you guys. Yeah, you're 100% right, Jason. Many of us that got into cyber got through it. Typically, I've noticed kind of in two paths, right? We either came in through the sysadmin ranks or we came in through the net eng or network
Mm.
engineering ranks. I came in through the network engineering ranks. I actually started, is going to date myself a little bit, but I started, my first job was at a company doing customer support for a company called NetManage, which was one of the early original TCP/IP stack vendors way back in the day when IP, which was not embedded inside of operating systems, you'd have to install a bunch of floppies to
Mm.
actually make the stack work. And I kind of
Yeah.
got a little bit of a bug into the networking world. And then about 2 to 3 years after that, I joined a company called Digital Island, which had global data center footprints, and we started to do managed services. And my first foray into security was deploying checkpoint firewalls on Sunnetra T1s. This was kind of late 90s, where we used to load balance between PIX 515s and checkpoint running on Sunnetra T1s and split traffic. That was kind of my first bug into security, and honestly, I haven't left it since. Like most of us in cyber, once you get into the community, it's kind of hard to let go.
Yeah, I think that's the thing you find too. Once you get the bug, so to speak, that can
Yeah.
be looked at in two ways, but nice pun. But it's one of those ones where it's and I sort of liken it, and Tom and I talk about it a bit also, almost like emergency services or someone who's sort of drawn to that as well. Once you sort of feel you can find a way or hopefully protect or save people, it tends to be something that once you get hold of it or get in it, you want to try and fix it. And I think, how long have you been at LastPass now? Just for listeners, your sort of progression into that, and how long you've been in that role, sort of what you've seen in that time as well, because it's a big company. It's gone through a few changes, over the years, even from the time I saw it. I used it as a straight, password manager, obviously, and had it's made a lot of metamorphoses as it had to move through the market. But how long have you been there for, and what have you seen, and what sort of attracted you to the role and grown into it now to be where you are now?
Yeah. So I joined in, I think it was April or May of 2022. So I've been here about 2.5 years.
Mhm.
And you're right. I mean, obviously, we saw a lot of changes across the business in general. We
Mm.
started to, and today we made a lot of investments in kind of the future and beyond password management, like many of the password managers have been. But identity is kind of a super interesting space. For
Mm.
a while, it was a bit stagnant. But I
Yeah.
think right now there's a fair bit of development and innovation happening in and around identity, and it's a really interesting area to kind of be a part of.
Well, AI's made it interesting, hasn't it? I mean, we talk about identities and people replicating an identity, whether it be through voice or through a visual mechanism or whatever the main way is, but it's made it a lot easier And we're always playing catch up, aren't we, with the other side, with the dark side of the web. You know, and people, the attackers coming in are always utilizing these tools and working in conjunction a lot more. What have you seen from your chair at LastPass, you know, on that front, and how have you sort of pivoted to try and sort of cover a lot of that off?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think that there's been so much written over the years about a bunch of trends that the fact that the network has effectively all but disappeared, and
Mm,
the move to use your own devices, and the consumerization of IT. These are sort of macro level trends that press love to write about. But what does that practically mean? It effectively means that we're now living in a world where people are used to using a multitude of devices, accessing cloud-based applications from anywhere, right? So
yeah.
you've got a geographic challenge, you've got a device challenge, and you've got an application security challenge. And the common thread through all that is that you've got a user accessing applications. So the models kind of switch to user to app.
Mm,
And for the most part, those applications are obviously increasingly, if not altogether, in the cloud. And so that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the identification of the user, um, and also puts a tremendous amount of pressure on not just authentication, but also the authorization of the user relative
mm,
to what application they can access and what they can actually do with the application. So that has really created a model, or forced a model where you kind of open up the aperture of what you can do with the client, whether it's on mobile or whether it's on a laptop. And that has given a lot of opportunity for us and others to kind of innovate around how do you do more seamless authentication? How do you do more secure authentication? How do you enable multi-factor authentication more
mm,
easily? How do you start to drive things like passwordless and passkeys, but at the same time, driving convenience to the user? Because as we all know, authentication is one of the few security elements of technology that's front and center to the user. Most of the other stuff is embedded inside of the network,
mm,
running in sys tray, embedded in the cloud. So I think really
yeah.
kind of striking that balance between security and convenience through the users, one of the most critical areas of work that we and others have been really kind of embarking on.
Yeah, and one more, just sorry before Tom jumps in, because I know he's got a bunch of questions as well. Sorry, mate, but it was just on that, is that what we're finding, and the same in the US. I know it's probably one of those things where you see we've got to keep the people who still haven't caught up with the basics going as well, don't we, Karim? At the same time as trying to get ahead of the curve as well, because we've got a lot of laggards or people that have not with anything to themselves, but have just stayed behind. You know, we talk about, and why I keep pushing, LastPass, and I've been fairly agnostic, as I had to be over the years as well, saying I don't care what password manager you use, but to make it easy for you as a general consumer, just get something that, you got one master password, you got everything else protected. Get multi-factor authentication, in place, so you got that second layer of protection and the updates when available. If we just had some people just with even basics, because it's not that hard to actually crack someone if you've just got a very simple password
Hmm.
and you just get their password and you don't then have anything else after it. And I think, where LastPass for me has always made it easy on my phones, on my computers, or whatever you're using for that purpose, and you have a strong master password, encrypted passwords, all that sort of stuff. That's the key, right? So we need to get that message out there. And I know we're talking in a group here, and this message will go mainly to our audience, which tends to be cyber professionals, right? And as I implore them all the time, and you're probably the same, and I know the team here with Matt and everything, we're trying to push the same message, right? You can get, as you guys have done recently, IRAP assessed and do all those sorts of things, which are all great. That LastPass is in that basket, but we still need to keep looking after these people who are just at that base level and basic level. So, how's that market for you guys? Because you've got a very good market where you've sort of spread across the basics, and then you've gone all the way up into the higher end. How's that market, and you finding that at the moment, both here and overseas?
Yeah, there's an interesting trend that we've been seeing for quite some time, which is the kind of the user transitioning into business, meaning the consumer
Yep.
transitioning into business. So if you double click on our business, we're about on one end of the spectrum, about 70% B2B, and 30% of our business is actually B2C.
Mm,
And what's interesting about that is many of our B2C users are professional users that then use our technology in the business, which then gives us the opportunity to go into businesses and say, hang on a second, did you know that you've got 10% of your workforce that's already using LastPass? We should bring you into sort of a business or enterprise
mm,
license. And
Yep.
that's key because one of the things that we've been doing for quite some time is kind of creating that seamless transition between the sort of personal and home environment, but also the business environment. And the repetition of that is, and the thing that creates breakthroughs is a consistent experience through both, right?
Mm.
So if I'm at home logging into a streaming service, if the workflow for me is just as easy and familiar as it is to use credentials within my corporate environment, I'm likely to follow that construct, be very familiar with it, and then it improves adoptability. One of the
Yep.
other things we're doing to kind of really help promote that is we have a family as a benefit plan for all of our businesses. So if you sign up with us as a business, we give each business user a free 5-user license for their families. And that's to do exactly what you said, which is a lot of
Mm.
this is about kind of educating people to do the bare minimum. We all
Yep.
evolve, hopefully, over time to become more secure. But wow,
Got to start
watching,
somewhere, don't you?
yeah, you got to
Mm.
start somewhere. And watching
Mm.
the pace of evolution in
Quick.
some
Yeah.
areas is painful to watch because
Mm.
people get popped, and in retro, you look back at it and you realize, wow, they didn't have to do a lot not to get popped.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just that sometimes it's slow moving. So we believe it starts with the consumer, but also goes into the business.
Karim, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into some of the stuff you've already touched on. But we were just speaking to the field CISO from Axonius, and one of the challenges they kind of really help solve is this mass data sprawl that's occurred across, enterprise organizations, and the real challenge of just having that visibility, which you were talking about earlier. But how do you kind of find that challenge with helping secure those identities and getting a big enterprise business on board with this kind of culture? Because we keep seeing these breaches where these very basic password managers, multi-factor authentication were just absent. So what is it like when you come in? Is it a cultural thing you're having to change, and how do you kind of bring them along on the journey?
Yeah, it's a super question. So look, I mean, I think where we enter kind of varies. It varies on the sophistication, it varies on the funding, it varies on the awareness, and that typically varies. Not always, although typically varies by the size of the organization and the industry that they're in. Right, as you very well know, typically
Mm.
national governments, large box retailers, financial institutions, insurance typically tend to be top of the heap in terms of their maturity and their investment in cyber. So I don't think there's a one size fits all in terms of what we observe when we come in. So I'll kind of give you a smattering of perspectives based on what we see. I would say the one common thread, however, is that most organizations we walk into, or pretty much everybody at this point, even small businesses, kind of root everything within the IDP or the identity provider. So if you're,
Mm.
it's either Okta or it's Microsoft. It could be, some other kind of player that's not one of those two. And those applications that are integrated in there do a pretty decent job at both visibility of the application, and then authentication and authorization. And of course, they do that through SSO and SAML.
Mm.
But what we see is that there's an increasing amount of applications that don't fit into that framework, right? And there's a number of reasons. Number one is it could be because the pace at which people are bringing in SaaS and AI apps is outstripping the capacity to be able to implement and integrate an SSO. Some of those applications don't support SSO, or
Mm.
there's a real SSO tax commercially, right? I mean, there's a great site, I think it's called ssotax.org, where it lists every vendor's price for the enterprise license that gives you
Mm.
SAML integration. And so a big part of this is the awareness and the visibility into all the other applications that actually people are using within their environment that are not integrated within the IDP and the framework. And that is the kind of perfect jumping off point in terms of understanding where people are in their evolution. And what we typically do is we come in, try to give them a quick assessment into understanding where they need password management to manage credentials to critical applications that are not integrated. The very mature organizations will typically have a fair bit of visibility, although not full visibility into where their application structure lies. outside of SSO integrated apps. And then the small to medium sized organizations, frankly, it's a bit of the Wild West. It's
Mm,
hard to see oftentimes what they're in. And so we come in, we help them align all that, and then put a policy construct around what types of passwords and what the policy is around sharing those passwords and how organizations can align around an identity policy. It's also the same time we begin to enable multi-factor authentication into all the application structures because as you guys know from a security perspective, it's kind of one of the easiest things that you can do to stop a whole cadre of attacks that can come in by using MFA. So it's really trying to get people to get the visibility and then implement the basics. And part of that is a cultural change because all identity management is kind of front and center to the user. It's really about appropriately understanding the application usage, defining an authentication policy, implementing, and then training the user, because the user training is a really critical part, much like the early days of MFA with push
mm.
notifications.
Yeah, and that's the. I think if you raise a few key points there. I think Tom, a note that was a super question from you. You'll probably want to clip that out for you because I think that's the first time anyone's ever said that on a pod. So that's
Yeah.
one. Two, we should put in our show notes. Karim mentioned there Microsoft. I don't think we've heard of those guys before, so we'll put a link to Microsoft in there because they're a very small organisation just starting up, so people can find them pretty easily as well. But the other part was that with the confusion, I think with a lot of standards as well, is that passwords is a confusing one. I know when we built the SMB 1001, which was a small
Yep.
business framework, and the
Yep.
passwords one as a committee was one of the most difficult ones, right? Do you have a password manager? What do you do? I know with Essential 8 here, passwords, should be in there, should be Essential 10 at least, and should have cloud security and, passwords in there as well. Because we talk about strong and unique passwords and all those sorts of things, but you imagine, Karim, and this is not just Australian context only, but if you're told, as the government said here, use strong and unique passphrases, multi-factor authentication updates when available, they were going to market with that. The challenge or the issue you have with that, obviously, is that imagine a person going, how am I going to remember all that? Because that's the thing. And that's where LastPass comes in, or any of that, right? One master
Right.
password protects
That's right.
everything, multi-factor authentication built in and everything like that.
That's
You
right.
guys have been lobbying for a while. I know that Matt and the team have been sort of talking a lot to government and the like. Where do you see passwords sit in and multi-factor? Because it's quite critical and it's sort of what your product's built around. So how do you get that message across, or how do you find the cut through to actually make it a bit more simple to both the enterprise customers and the end users?
Yeah. Well, for businesses, it starts with, for both markets, it starts with education as
Mm.
much as possible. And look, I
And
mean,
that's
we're
hard, isn't
only,
it? Because the
it
education part,
is.
if you think from a business perspective, what you do is actually quite simple for us in the industry, right? But then get that message or that cut through the rest of the market, and that's part of your selling process, isn't it? Which is this is where we sit, this is where we fit, and this is why it's good. But it's still sometimes a bit of a challenge because at the back of people's heads are going, yeah, but how do I remember like one really long master password or something like that? And it's like, well, have you been remembering all of your passwords before that? Like it's a
Yeah, and
re-education.
as you know, Jason, the answer is they haven't, right? Like a
That's
huge
right.
number of users do reuse passwords all the time. But look, I
Correct.
mean,
Yep.
look, I think we're one voice. The competitors in the market are another voice. I actually,
Yep.
I actually liked it when Google and Micro and Apple got into the space by
Mm,
embedding it into browsers, because like I use my mom as a classic example. She initially, before I got her on LastPass, was using Apple Keychain
mm,
embedded into the browser. And I thought to myself, great, it's a start. There are limitations with
mm,
that technology, and you get locked into the Apple ecosystem. But I think a kind of rising tide floats all boats is probably the
mm.
best way to think about this. And I
Correct.
think we've
Mm.
got multiple of us trying to educate the consumer market. I think
Yep.
the business market, I will tell you, my observation
It's
is
up
that the
there.
business, it's a little different. And the
Mm,
business market, I think that what we see is there's a real opportunity for SaaS and AI proliferation to actually drive the authentication conversation,
mm.
right?
Agree.
And
Mm,
this is one of the reasons we started to get into and built technology kit to get into the SaaS monitoring and protection space, because we found that while we're helping secure identities into SaaS apps, if we can provide the visibility, it will raise the awareness of how big of a problem organizations have. and incorporate a much higher degree of willingness to actually solve that problem and do it at scale.
And I think one of the really interesting things that, listening to you both talk about is we've got this kind of core cultural challenge around people just, and organizations still grasping this. And then at the same time, we've got this conversation going along, and we saw a little bit of it at RSA this year, around, the rise of passwordless authentication and passkeys. And this kind of idea that passwords are going to disappear in the future. So first of all, how do you kind of reconcile that with where we are today, and how as an organization are you kind of preparing for, the changes that are kind of coming along? Do you think that they'll just disappear and we'll be using kind of passkeys everywhere? What's it going to look like for an organization like you as well?
Yeah. Look, technology transitions, history tells us they take time. And our early view is this one will take a fair bit of time because it invokes behavioral change for the user, right? If this was a transparent technology shift, then it could happen maybe at a higher clip, at a higher rate. We started to see the emergence of Passkeys, the underlying technology that makes passwordless work, a few years ago. Did some early development. We started by doing passwordless access to the vault, which is fully supported. We recently launched full passwordless and passkey support. So now, if I'm a user and I'm using LastPass, I can simultaneously store passkeys, but I can also store username and passwords. And once you log in, to your point, Jason, about a single master password, once you log in using, let's say in mobile, using biometrics into the vault handles, when you click on the site, the vault handles either passing a passkey or a username and password combination.
Yep.
And that's completely transparent to the user. So that's the beauty of it. And so our view is we're going to live in sort of this commingled environment for quite a few years. In terms of adoption, here's what is interesting. At least in the US, we're starting to see faster adoption of passkeys on the consumer side than we are in the B2B side. Okay. And the reason is because large box retailers, large banking companies have already switched their application. As you guys know, implementation of passkeys requires a client-side change, but also requires a server-side or application change. And so the large retail organizations, including banking, have already switched to supporting passkeys. So I can sign up to a Bank of America and switch over from my username and password to passkeys. The applications on the B2B side are much longer tailed. I mean, look, there are SaaS-based apps that don't fully support SSO SAML today. And here we are, 13 years, 14 years after the standard was ratified. So you begin to see that there's going to be a long tail of applications within businesses that for some time are going to need to support this hybrid environment.
Yeah. And can I just ask one, because we talked about being popped as well. And I remember a couple of years ago at RSA, I think you guys got popped just before we went to RSA, and I was feeling so sorry for the guys on the floor. Probably a blessing and a curse, because I see it as two things. I think it's good you can handle it live, right, when you get people in there. Not great for the people, because I remember, but I think you learn more from actually getting and going through an incident than what you do from not, right? You get on your bike, you fix things you can't find, because you're always constantly patching things, and people remember the 1 or 2 times you get popped over the billions of times that you've protected people. Can you sort of speak to that and what the sort of outcomes of that happening have been, for you guys? Because I don't know why in the industry we always look negatively upon something like that happening. I actually honestly see it the other way around, is when an incident happens, you fix so much more in your business than when you're lazily going along. And you probably already got someone in your network or in your business you're not even aware of, but to be able to find it and fix it and be able to get better from it is something I believe. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because, you've been there 2.5 years. You've had some stuff happen in the time you've been there. Yeah. I think it's been handled well, but it's always that sort of elephant in the room, isn't it? That people go, even if they don't say it directly, they're thinking it. So how do you guys sort of speak to that at the moment now, having gone through the experience, now looking back in that sort of rearview mirror when you do?
Yeah, so I started 3.5 years ago, and the incident happened. The incident happened. The initial incident happened just about 3 years ago. It was August of 22. And
I think that was a welcome present to you, mate. I think that was
it was a welcome present. Yeah.
I
think it happened about 2.5 months. Exactly. It was 2.5 months after I started, which was a bit of a surprise. But look, I mean,
Surprise for everyone.
uh, it was a surprise for everyone. It was a
Yeah.
surprise for everyone, right? I will tell you. I mean, I think you hit on something that I believe in deeply, Jason, which is the fact that you know, if you treat an incident the way it's supposed to be treated, which is that you use it as a forcing function to drive change, while it's extremely difficult to navigate through, because there'll be a lot of people from public opinion to consumers
Mm,
to businesses to employees to board members that will have a lot of opinions, many of which are divergent at times. But if you kind of do the hard work, you come out of it so much stronger and galvanized.
agree. Mm,
You know, and so you know what we ended up doing was setting forward on a multi-year journey where we're now in an incredible position. No one is ever perfectly secure, as you all know. The threat landscape
mm,
evolves at a pretty torrid pace, but you know we now have a very sizable security operation and team. We have about 58, 59 people in our cyber team, which for an organization approaching 1,000 people is a pretty meaningful investment. We
mm,
invest millions of dollars in infrastructure, but more importantly, we brought in incredible people as part of the process
mm,
because we were the one of the things that that wasn't really made public, or we didn't talk about because it wasn't related to the incident at the time, and it would have sounded like an excuse. We were in the
mm,
midst of going through separation because we were part of a larger company, so we were rebuilding all of our systems and
mm.
spinning the company out in the midst of the breach. And so
Yeah.
we use that as an opportunity to rebuild all the processes, build in the security operations practice and the discipline. And you know, as a result, we stand here in a much better place than we were 3 years ago, with a lot of lessons learned and a lot better efficacy across the stack.
Yeah, and I think it's good the way you speak to it as well, because Tom and I were there at one of your talks at RSA like last year. Remember, Tommy, when we went out, had a nice breakfast out there. I think Tom and I had about 26 croissants between us. But the security team were there actually talking about how they had secured it and off the back of that incident. And I think that's what people need to know. The ambulance chasing or the thing that people jump on as soon as the CrowdStrike incident happened. I did a post to sort of say, here's a bit of a workaround, more for the people who, especially in other parts of the world, like because we're in Australia, we were Friday afternoon or something like that. I think from memory, it hit us about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So as soon as there was a workaround, I put it out there. So hopefully, when people in the US or the UK or wherever woke up, they've got here's a way we can sort of work around it. I think we need to work as helpers of each other to assist each other rather than being ambulance chasers or people jumping on and going, oh yeah, that happened to the vendor that we're up against, and sort of
Yeah,
dancing on the grave, because that'll come back and bite you in the ass as well. You know, as soon as someone goes, oh, that wouldn't have happened to us, or our product's better, you can bet your ass that sort of gets the criminals pretty excited as well and go, well, let's try and prove you wrong. You know, so you got I think you guys found a good balance in the way you recovered from it, the way you countered it. They didn't go that deep into it, you know. From that's the other thing too. My stuff that was in there, I didn't have any problems. You know, I was
yeah,
protected.
yeah.
It's a good reminder for people, maybe change your master password or look at other stuff with inside your environment as well that you might want to look and change. So I think incidents happening need to be a reflective thing, not just for the organization, but for the rest of the businesses out there, and saying that happens to them, where should we look to try and protect ourselves? It should be looked as a guiding post to make us better and stronger, as would happen on the dark web. You know, if they find a phishing kit that works, they share that with everyone. Hey, this
That's
worked, you
right.
know, let's share it, you know, rather than keeping it in our own environment. So yeah, no, I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's worth talking about, because it's often in the back of people's heads. But I think from my perspective, the way it's handled, I'm still a customer, as I said, still paying customer. You go through it, you understand that's just the normal course of business. And if not now, when? You're going to get attacked at some point, and someone's going to try and attack you. And yeah, the way you recover from it, I think you did that very well. And as a customer, I felt super comfortable with the communication, everything else that happened, that I knew that I was okay. It was
Yeah.
transparent. It was handled in a timely manner. You know, you sort of explained everything. And from being in industry, and as Tom and I said, you know, being in talks and talking to the security team, I feel even more safe being a customer now than what I would have been even prior to that.
Yeah, yeah, no, the investments we made were meaningful, and I think one of the best things is, you know, this is a little bit more like palace intrigue. We worked quite a bit, not with just our company, but researchers, but also our board, to get the kind of
Mm,
commitment from an investment perspective, because it was a really meaningful commitment that we made. in building out the security apparatus that we kind of proudly stand on today, both from a dollars perspective, but also the caliber of people that we brought on board that really helped us really kind of get to the point where we are today. And the
Yeah.
commitment to the future, right? As we said, this
Yep.
thing never stops, right? You know what
No,
the evolution
it
of the
kept
threat
evolving.
landscape looks like. That's right.
Mm.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and so something that really intrigues me about this whole environment is the cultural aspect of it. So there was a large role that governments played in kind of like, I guess you described as regulation and getting people to wear seatbelts in cars,
Mm.
airbags. In Australia, sun cream. There was a famous campaign that still resonates with people. Slip, slop, slap. Incredibly simplified that whole thing. In Australia recently, we've had a whole bunch of new cyber laws passed, not really dealing with this particular area. You mentioned earlier about 30% of your customer group is that B2C, but that they are actually the people when they get on board using that are kind of bringing this in. If we, you're in Sydney, if we went down into the harbour and kind of, I used to work in TV news, we do those kind of vox pops and we've started asking people, most people wouldn't be using these kind of things. So do you think there's more of a role for regulation or government awareness in these basic kind of cyber hygiene areas using a password manager? Because it just simplifies everything for me. As soon as I started using LastPass,
Yeah.
my father's a complex systems mathematician. So he's one in the 5 million people that actually remembers a massive complex password. Doesn't have a problem with that. But for the rest of us, it's a real challenge. So do you think there's a bigger role for regulation? It's a cultural thing, and we're just having to take the time. Like, why is it such a sticky problem or a wicked problem?
Yeah. I think there's definitely, well, I think multiple people are responsible for roles in getting us to the right place. I think
Mm.
I'll start um, with government. I think there's a role for education to the broader consumer community because it is in their best interest to do so. And then there's a role for regulation.
Mm.
At least what we see in the U.S., and I think given some of the things my team here on the ground has educated me on, I think the U.S. and Australian governments have, I think, the right perspective relative to the evolution of compliance frameworks. Right? You have things here like SMB 1001, then you
Mm.
have other kind of mandates that are effectively frameworks, not fully mandated, but at least they create a baseline and
Mm.
understanding what it is that organizations should be doing at a minimum. And I think that's going to be really critical to push moving forward. I think the reseller, we sell most of our business goes through partners. I think
Mm.
the reseller and managed service providers plays also a critical role. We met with
Yeah.
a series of partners this week, and many of them are starting to embed password management as part of their standard managed services offering
Mm.
into organizations. Now, why is that important? There's kind of two sides of the coin. One is because it solves a real pain point and a problem and increases the efficacy of the organization relative to the security and the hygiene of their credentials that their users are using. Number two, it makes business sense for MSPs. It reduces the liability because in the
Mm.
event something happens, the first thing the company's going to do is point to their MSP and say, wait a minute, you're my managed security services provider. I got popped. You're managing my infrastructure. So it's kind of good for both. And then thirdly, I would say, look, there's a role to be played by us, the vendors. Proliferation means we've got to get better at embedding the capabilities of security more easily front and center to the user, particularly as authentication flows sit in front of the user. That means making the onboarding much easier. That means making the autofill much easier. That means making the saving of the passkey, the
Mm.
password much easier. That means integrating both passkey and username and password support. So I think all three bodies play a critical role in getting consumers and employees to a better state.
And how about just kind of one of the last things that's been buzzing around in my head, shadow IT, shadow AI. We've
Yeah,
spoken to a few people about it. I mean, you mentioned you've got some new products, SaaS monitoring and SaaS protect. But
yeah.
first of all, where do you see the kind of impact happening across organizations? And then what are the steps you think we need to do to kind of tackle this emerging problem?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one for us. So about a year and a half ago, we started to do some research because we were really curious what the utilization pattern was. Like, why are people using the vault side of businesses, and what are they actually authenticating into? And more often than not, they were authenticating in the applications. Back to the point you made earlier, that are not tied into the SSO or MFA infrastructure through SAML. And we realized that we sit in the authentication flow right here. But if you look at the problem statement is actually much further up market, meaning that, or up flow from the application stack, meaning that I'm authenticating into a SaaS app. Well, organizations would come back to us and say, wow, it'd be great if you could tie the credential to the application that people are using so that we could validate that it's an application that's legitimate that we want them to use.
Mm.
And so we recognize the opportunity to be able to participate. Oh, and then ultimately, wouldn't it even be better to extend our policy construct and language to be able to do different things, like potentially even block access to particular applications? So we set upon a research project about a year ago, and it turns out that the privilege of us having a extension, which is the form factor that we deploy in the browser, actually sits and gives us access to all the Webflow data. So we built a technology that does not require you to implement any additional software. There's no agent deployed, et cetera, where we can now, once you deploy LastPass, not only give you the vault for the password manager, but we can now, for the administrators, provide full visibility into all applications that users are using, SaaS, anything through the browser. And then we tied that to the authentication scheme. So this is kind of not, even if you have a CASB or a Zscaler or other, or Defender deployed, it's not easy to do very quickly, which is we tied the authentication mode into the app, meaning that we'll tell them, hey, these are the SaaS apps that people are using. These are the ones that are signing in via SSO. And then we double click and we're like, well, hey, man, you have 300 people that are using SSO. There's 5 people still using a side channel account to log in via usernames and password. And oh, by the way, those usernames and password aren't vaulted inside of LastPass. So
Mm.
we give you full visibility. And then yesterday, we just announced our next product, which is SaaS Protect, which is now we can enable policies to actually block. So it really depends on your maturity and policy construct you want to enable. We can just monitor. We can pop up a modal inside of the browser that says, hang on a second, Tom. Monday.com is our corporate project management app. You can't log into Reich, or we can block you all altogether. And that's just a function of how you want to configure the platform and system. And what that's allowed us to do is drive a lot more value to the organization, not just on the identity side, but being able to tie the identity on one end of the spectrum to visibility of all apps, and on the other end of the spectrum to a policy of application access.
Mm. That's solid. And
Yeah, that's very cool. What have the conversations been like in Australia? I'm curious from your perspective. You know, larger in the US, much bigger market, businesses, enterprise businesses, all that kind of stuff. So you know, and I imagine there's some common problems or challenges, but are there some unique ones that you're finding out in the Australian market? What's your kind of experience been on this trip?
Yeah, I think that there's really common problem statement across the board. We don't. I mean, honestly, Tom, the problem statement of SaaS application visibility, sort of solving the shadow IT, shadow AI problem, SaaS protection and authentication is a problem up and down the stack. I mean, this is kind of the ironic part. We see, large RFPs from organizations that have a serious project underway where they want to deploy it across the board. And then we see the requirements that are very similar in nature into small to medium sized businesses. I mean, today we have over 100,000 B2B customers, and we'll have organizations that's a law firm for 4 or 5 people upwards to, Fortune 1000 accounts. And I think the interesting part is there's a common statement of the problem across the board. Where do we see variation? Where we see variation is around deployability and breadth of deployability, meaning that are they mandated to be able to have to do something in and around the space? We see some people will start with smaller deployments into, let's say, IT and security, perhaps the executive suite, a handful of people in marketing, And then over time, they'll evolve to have it available for everybody within the organization. So it's really around how stringent are people on policy, and how broad are they in terms of their deployment across the board. Those are kind of the two variations that change up and down the size of the organizations that are deploying and engaging with us.
Wonderful. Well, we're just about time. Do you have anything else you'd like to ask, Jason?
No, look, I think it's good that just to watch the evolution of these sorts of things. And thanks for coming on, because we sometimes have a perception of a certain product in the market as just being something. And I think because obviously being a customer, I get updates in email all the time, so I know about all the changes. So you're quite aware of it, and you sort of go along for the journey. But I think for people who haven't, I mean, it's free to start if you're just a normal person, right? You can just
That's
get
right.
a free LastPass and just get started. For organizations out there, I am, chair of the DSO, the steering committee for the SMB 1001, and that we did start it as just a standard for here in Australia, but it's now gone, sort of a worldwide standard, and in there, passwords is the main vexing issue, and I think I've always said, a password manager is the most simple way to fix that for so many people. And as you said, the easy part is once it's on there, your master password, you just use biometrics to get in or whatever. It's not hard. As soon as you go to a site, LastPass pops up, gives you the credentials to get in there, and you can use your thumb or your face to basically make sure it's secure getting in there. It's really simple to apply. I think even if people knew what LastPass was in the past, it's nothing like that now, well into the future. And I think the way you're evolving, I think is a credit to you guys and the team. And as I said, I do use it, and I declare that, but for fair interest, but I don't care. Like you said, I'm sort of agnostic when it comes to what we're doing on the DSI sort of side of things. Just use something, right? Just make it easy
Right.
for yourself. That's
Right.
that's the thing. But keep up doing the great work, mate. The team works really well here. We work with them quite a bit, and had a lot of successful events here. And I think it's well received here. And a lot of big organisations already deploy LastPass, but this is hopefully going to help a few people use it even better, or get a few more people on board.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we appreciate the time and the support, and you're 100% right, Jason. I mean, we've got, and when I say we, I mean kind of the collective community.
The royal we.
We've got an opportunity. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's right. I mean, we've got a real opportunity here, especially on the identity side. As I said, that's kind of front and center to the user, to just make things secure and easy for the user, right? I mean, we've all been in the space, for the better part of 3 decades. We've got to be careful, right? There's like a real trust problem here. We keep deploying and pushing technology down the throat of users, and we got to be thoughtful about how to make that really simple and make that secure. Otherwise, at some point in time, we're going to kind of lose the credibility. And so it's a really important part about how do you enable people and educate them to really do something that's relevant and meaningful to them, that's going to make their lives easier, but also really secure. Because when you're on the other side, whether you're a corporation or an individual, when you're on the other side of a security incident, it's painful, right? My father-in-law went through one. It takes forever to unravel.
8 years.
Right? So,
Like even some of the big ones that happened here a few years ago, like around the same time as you, like back in 22, wasn't time with Medibank and Optus and all those ones. They're still getting flow-on effect from that now. Like we're sitting here in
yeah, I know.
2025, and
Yep.
after all that time, they're still cleaning up from those incidents, and it's a challenge, right? And that's something that people don't realize, is that it's not just that event, the build up to it and fixing it at the time when you're critically fixing it. It's the maintenance and all the repair work, and having the industry bodies and all the governments and everyone else putting their beaks in, and the fines and all the other stuff that you have to deal with. It takes a lot away from your own business. So prevention is the best cure for this sort of thing. And
Right.
thank you for all your work that you've done, mate, and for joining us here today. I know you've got a busy schedule. Matt's got you booked in, probably doing 1,000 things back to back.
Yeah.
So thanks for
Good.
taking the time with us to have a chat here. And I'll throw it over to you, Tom.
Yeah, well, look, again, thank you. And just listeners, I'd just love you to kind of, we go to work every day, but when you go in today, just make sure that there is a password manager. You can use this one for free. It took my son losing his Roblox account to actually build these kind of behaviors. It didn't help me kind of telling him. But again, kind of break that schema, go in, ask those questions if it's absent, because it's not creating extra friction. It's actually preventing you from having a huge amount of problems downstream. So, you can find Karim on LinkedIn. You can read more about LastPass on their website. Thank you, Karim, for joining us. Thank you, Jason, as always.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, have a wonderful day, guys.
Thanks, Tom. All right.
Thanks,
Take
Karim.
care.